December 3rd, 1943. Captain Jim McKenzie was 6 seconds from death. At 15,000 feet over Long Island, his P-47 Thunderbolt had become an 8-ton coffin spinning out of control. The most powerful fighter engine ever built, 3,000 horses of American fury, was trying to tear his aircraft apart from the inside. The horizon tumbled past his canopy. Sky, earth. His hands gripped the control stick so hard his knuckles had gone white beneath his leather gloves. Every muscle in his body strained against forces that wanted to flip him upside down and send him spiraling into the Atlantic. This wasn't combat. This wasn't enemy fire or mechanical failure. This was physics itself trying to kill him. 9 months earlier, this same aircraft was supposed to be America's secret weapon. The Germans had jets. The Japanese had kamikazes. We had this. An engine so powerful it could push a fighter past 470 miles per hour, faster than anything with propellers had ever flown. There was just one problem. Nobody could fly it without dying. Mackenzie's training kicked in. Throttle back, reduce power. The violent shaking eased enough for him to regain some control. His heart hammered against his ribs. Sweat soaked through his flight suit despite the freezing altitude. He keyed his radio with trembling fingers. Republic Tower Test Bird 7, experiencing severe control issues. Returning to base. The response crackled in his headphones. Roger, Test Bird. You're cleared for emergency landing, but one man, a stubborn engineer from Connecticut that everybody called crazy, had an idea so stupid, so impossible, so against every rule of aviation that it just might work. His name was Thomas Harrison. And this is the story of how his insane contraption saved thousands of American lives, helped win World War II, and earned him a handshake from a German fighter ace who once tried to kill him. In the next hour, you'll discover how 2 propellers spinning in opposite directions changed the course of history, why a captured German pilot refused to believe what he saw until he flew it himself, and what happened when Harrison and that German ace met again 20 years later in Wisconsin. If you or your family served during World War II, you're going to want to hear this story. Let us know in the comments where you served. What was Harrison's crazy idea? Hold that thought. October 18th, 1943. Republic Aviation Works, Farmingdale, Long Island, New York. The autumn rain drummed against the hangar roof in a steady rhythm that marked time America couldn't afford to lose. Inside, beneath harsh industrial lighting, Captain Jim McKenzie pulled himself from the cockpit of what should have been the Army Air Force's most formidable weapon. His flight suit clung to his body, drenched with sweat despite the October chill. Chief Engineer Bob Mitchell waited on the tarmac, his face carrying the weight of a problem that mathematics said couldn't be solved. He didn't need to ask how the test flight went. The answer was written in the tremor of Mackenzie's hands as he removed his leather gloves, in the pallor of his face, in the way he braced himself against the fuselage like a man who'd just stepped off a ship in a storm. How bad? Mitchell's voice was quiet. Mackenzie looked up at the aircraft, this beast of American engineering that represented everything the Allies needed. Speed, firepower, the legendary agility that had saved Britain during the darkest days. But something had gone catastrophically wrong. At 350 miles per hour, she wants to roll left so hard I nearly put her into a spin. Mackenzie's Scottish accent, usually barely noticeable after 10 years in Boston, thickened with frustration. The torque from that bloody engine. It's like the propeller is trying to tear the nose clean off the airframe. Above 400. Forget about it. No pilot alive could hold her straight in a combat situation. The numbers painted a grim picture. The new Pratt & Whitney R4-360 Wasp major engine generated 3,000 horsepower at sea level, nearly double that of the original engines that had powered earlier Thunderbolt variants. That raw power should have pushed the aircraft past 470 miles per hour, making it faster than any German fighter in the sky. Instead, the massive torque reaction the equal and opposite force Newton had described centuries earlier twisted the entire airframe with such violence that pilots couldn't maintain level flight at combat speeds. Mitchell ran his hand along the propeller hub, feeling the slight vibration that never fully stopped, even when the engine was shut down. The engineering challenge was brutally simple in concept, devastatingly complex in execution. Every revolution of that massive 4-bladed propeller generated a rotational force that tried to spin the aircraft in the opposite direction. At low speeds, pilots could compensate with rudder input and muscle. But as airspeed increased, the aerodynamic forces amplified the problem exponentially. The result was an aircraft that became progressively more dangerous to fly the faster it went, exactly the opposite of what combat demanded. A young mechanic, barely 19, approached with a tool cart. Billy Thompson had joined Republic Aviation straight out of high school in Queens, too young for the draft, but desperate to contribute to the war effort somehow. He'd grown up on stories of Eddie Rickenbacker and the Lafayette Escadrille. Now he worked 18-hour shifts, helping build the machines that would win the war his older brother was fighting in France. "Captain, you okay?" Mackenzie managed a weak smile for the kid. "Ask me again when my heart stops trying to escape my chest, son. I just fought an 8-ton bucking bronco at 350 miles per hour." "We gonna fix it, sir?" The question hung in the cold October air. Mackenzie looked at the eager young faces of the ground crew. Mechanics who'd never see combat but who worked themselves to exhaustion, making sure the aircraft that did see combat came home. Kids like Billy, who believed in American ingenuity, who'd been raised on stories of the Wright brothers and Charles Lindbergh, who couldn't imagine a problem American engineers couldn't solve. "We better," Mackenzie said quietly, "because if we don't, a lot of pilots are going to die in aircraft that should have saved them." "The Germans have the same problem with their high-powered fighters," Mitchell said, though his tone carried no comfort. "Their Focke-Wulf 190 series suffers from similar torque issues. They've learned to work around it with pilot training and tactical limitations." Mackenzie shook his head sharply. "We can't work around physics, Malcolm. This isn't about pilot technique or training protocols. At the speeds we need to achieve air superiority over Western Europe, this aircraft is simply unflyable." Everyone in that hangar understood the stakes. The Ministry of Aircraft Production had already invested $15 million developing the WASP major engine and redesigning the Thunderbolt's airframe to accommodate its increased size and weight. Production schedules called for 600 of these aircraft to begin rolling off assembly lines within months. The Army Air Forces desperately needed the high-speed interceptor to counter intelligence reports of German jet fighter development. Failure wasn't just an engineering setback. It represented a potentially catastrophic gap in Allied air power at the most critical phase of the war. But 75 miles northeast, a stubborn engineer had been working on something that would change everything. Harrison's idea was so crazy even he almost didn't propose it. 75 miles away in the cluttered office of Hamilton Standard Propeller Division, East Hartford, Connecticut, Thomas Harrison sat at a corner booth in Rosie's Diner surrounded by technical drawings and empty coffee cups. The pre-dawn darkness outside the window reflected his own tired face back at him. 5:30 in the morning, same time he'd been arriving at the same diner for the past 3 years. "Morning, Tom." Usual Dolores, the waitress who'd been working the early shift since her husband shipped out to the Pacific, already had her pencil poised over her order pad. Harrison barely looked up from the propeller diagrams spread across the red vinyl table. "Please, scrambled eggs, bacon, black coffee, toast." Every morning the same order. Dolores had learned not to make conversation when Harrison's drawings were out. The man had a mind that lived somewhere most people couldn't follow, and she'd learned to respect that space. Her husband was a gunner on a B-17 over Germany. If Tom Harrison's propellers helped bring him home, she'd pour coffee until the war ended and never say a word. Harrison was 42 years old but looked older. Premature gray streaked his dark hair. His shirt was rumpled, oil-stained despite being clean that morning. He'd forgotten to fix his glasses again. Wire held the left temple piece together, a temporary repair from 6 months ago that had become permanent through sheer forgetfulness. His wife Sarah said he'd forget to eat if she didn't pack lunch. But his mind, that restless engine that never stopped turning over problems, lived in a realm of forces and stresses in mathematics that described how metal moved through air. Right now, that mind was circling a problem that had defeated every conventional approach. The phone on the wall behind the counter rang. Dolores answered, then called across the diner. "Tom, it's for you." Harrison looked up confused. Nobody called him at the diner. He walked to the counter, took the receiver. "Tom, we got a problem." Bob Mitchell's voice carried the exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept. "The WASP major is tearing our P-47s apart with torque." Any ideas? Harrison stared at his notes still spread across the booth. He'd been studying this exact problem for 3 weeks. The conventional solutions had all failed. Bigger rudder added weight and drag without solving the fundamental physics. Modified engine mounts weakened the airframe structure. Adjusted propeller blade angles helped marginally, but created new problems with efficiency and vibration. The moment stretched. On the other end of the line, Mitchell waited. In the kitchen, Dolores's eggs sizzled. Outside, the first workers were arriving at the factories that ran 24 hours a day, building the machines that would end the war. Harrison saw it clearly. Two propellers, opposite rotation, same shaft. Don't fight the torque, cancel it. Front propeller bending clockwise. Rear propeller spinning counterclockwise. Equal and opposite forces meeting at the same point. Net torque zero. Simple physics, complex engineering, but possible. He knew it was possible, but he also knew what was coming. The ridicule, the resistance, the bureaucracy. He'd fought this fight before with variable pitch propellers. Took 2 years to convince the industry that his crazy idea would work. 2 years of being called impractical over complex, too ambitious. Now variable pitch was standard on every fighter in the sky. The war wouldn't wait 2 years this time. I have an idea, he said finally, but you're going to call me crazy. Tom, we're past crazy. We need impossible. Harrison looked at his sketch. 2 circles arrows showing opposite rotation. Mathematics didn't lie. Physics was honest. If you understood the forces, you could harness them. That was the difference between theoretical and practical. Theoretical said it couldn't be done. Practical said, make it work anyway, Good Harrison said, because I've got that too. 5,000 miles away, a German fighter pilot was about to become part of this story in the most unexpected way. Luftwaffe Airfield occupied France, October 1943. The morning briefing room smelled of coffee, tobacco, and the peculiar tension that came before combat missions. Hauptmann Klaus Schneider, 28 years old and already an ace with 47 confirmed kills, stood before the map of the English Channel with the confidence of a man who'd survived 2 years of aerial combat through skill and precision. He was Prussian military through 3 generations. His grandfather had served under von Moltke. His father had been a fighter pilot in the Great War. Klaus himself had been groomed for command since childhood. Every movement precise, every decision calculated, every victory earned through superior technique rather than lucky circumstance. The intelligence officer tapped the map. Americans deploying new P-47 variant with powerful engine, expected over the channel within weeks. Schneider scoffed. Another American innovation. All brute force, no finesse. The other pilots chuckled. They'd grown up on stories of German engineering excellence. Precision, efficiency, elegance. American philosophy as they understood it was different. Throw more power at it. Hope it works. Build 10 aircraft for every one the Germans could produce and overwhelm through numbers rather than quality. Schneider had seen this firsthand. The P-47 Thunderbolts were heavy, predictable aircraft. Powerful, yes, but they lacked the nimble grace of his Focke-Wulf 190. He'd shot down 3 of them in the past month, each time the same tactic. Use superior maneuverability to get inside their turn radius. Quick burst. Watch them spiral down. The mission brief continued. Bomber interception. B-17CS coming over at midday. Standard procedure. Schneider half listened. He'd flown this mission dozens of times. Approach from above and behind. Target the stragglers. Avoid the escorts if possible. Use speed and altitude advantage. What the intelligence officer didn't tell them, what the captured documents buried in Berlin's defense ministry wouldn't reveal for another 6 months, was that American engineers were solving problems the Germans hadn't even attempted. That somewhere in Connecticut, a self-taught designer was sketching solutions that would change everything. Within 6 weeks, Schneider himself would be a prisoner of war on Long Island, and he'd witness firsthand what American raw power combined with precision engineering could achieve. October 22nd, 1943. Republic Aviation Boardroom, Farmingdale. The long mahogany table was scarred from 3 years of coffee cups and urgent meetings. 8 senior engineers sat around it, their faces showing the strain of working impossible hours under impossible deadlines. At the head of the table, General William Bradford from the War Production Board projected the kind of authority that came from making decisions where lives hung in the balance. Harrison's drawings were spread across the table. Contra-rotating propeller system, 2 complete assemblies, complex gearbox, precision manufacturing requirements that pushed American industrial capacity to its theoretical limits. The immediate reactions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Gentleman Harrison stood his Connecticut accent carrying traces of the Irish grandfather who'd come through Ellis Island with nothing but hope and stubbornness. We have 3,000 horsepower we can't use. The torque reaction at high speed makes the P-47 unflyable. Every conventional solution has failed. I'm proposing we stop fighting the torque and start canceling it. He pointed to his diagram. Front propeller clockwise 1825 revolutions per minute. Rear propeller counterclockwise 1475. Equal and opposite forces. Net torque 0. Additional benefit 15% thrust increase from improved efficiency. This isn't just solving a problem. It's creating an aircraft that performs better at high speed than at low speed. Every fighter pilot's dream. Senior engineer Walter Davies was first to object. Tom, you're talking about a gearbox that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep. Planetary gear trains contra rotating shafts. Precision timing under 3,000 horsepower loads. In a combat environment, madness. Production manager Frank Sullivan followed. 350 extra pounds of gearbox and second propeller assembly. The P-47 is already our heaviest fighter. You're making it heavier to make it faster. That's not how physics works. Colonel Anderson from Field Operations leaned forward. My mechanics can barely keep single propeller systems running in the field. You want them maintaining two complete propeller assemblies with a complex gearbox in between. During combat operations in Pacific heat, in European winter, even Bob Mitchell, who'd called Harrison for help, looked troubled. Tom, I respect your work, but this is a Rube Goldberg machine. We need simple, proven, reliable. This is none of those things. Harrison had expected every objection. He'd rehearsed his responses during the 75-mile drive from Hartford. But standing here facing men who held the power to approve or kill his idea, feeling the weight of all those pilots' lives hanging on his ability to convince them, the words caught in his throat for a moment. He thought of his nephew, 22 years old, flying P-47s out of England. Every mission a roll of dice. Every time pushing an aircraft that might kill him before the enemy got the chance. You're all right, he said quietly. It is complex, it is heavy, it is a maintenance challenge. But you're also all wrong about having any other choice. He dropped the flight test report on the table. The sound echoed in the silent room. Current status, our most powerful fighter can't fly at combat speeds without killing pilots. We've tried every simple solution. They all failed. The Germans have jets hitting 540 miles per hour. We're stuck at 350. His voice rose with passion now. I'm fourth-generation American. My great-grandfather came here with nothing, built a life through hard work and not accepting impossible. That's what we do here. We tackle problems everyone else calls unsolvable. We don't quit because it's hard. This system will work. The math is sound. The engineering is achievable. And when it does work, we'll have the fastest, most maneuverable fighter aircraft in the world. That's worth the complexity. The room was silent. Harrison's voice cracked slightly as he continued. My nephew flies P-47s out of England. He's 22. Every time he goes up, I wonder if the aircraft I helped design will bring him home. Right now, I know it won't. Not if he pushes it to combat speeds. Gentlemen, I can't live with that. Can you? The silence stretched. Outside, the sound of aircraft engines being tested carried through the walls. The constant background noise of a factory that never stopped building machines for a war that consumed them as fast as they could be produced. General Bradford stood slowly. Mr. Harrison, that was either the most inspiring speech I've heard in this war or the most manipulative. I'm not sure which. He paused, looking at each man around the table. But I'm also a practical man. We're losing pilots to unflyable aircraft. Your solution is risky, but doing nothing is guaranteed failure. You have 6 weeks to build one prototype. Ground tests must prove the concept. If they do one test flight, success means production. Failure means you're finished in aviation. Understand you're betting your career, our resources, and potentially pilot lives on this idea. Harrison met his gaze steadily. I understand, sir, and I accept those terms. Harrison had 6 weeks to build something that had never been attempted. And 5,000 miles away, Klaus Schneider was about to have a very bad day over Belgium. November 15th, 1943, 23,000 feet over Belgium. The sky was that particular shade of blue that came with high altitude and clear weather. Perfect hunting conditions. Schneider led his flight of 4 Focke-Wulf 1900s in a lazy circle waiting for the American bombers that intelligence promised would arrive within the hour. Below, the patchwork of Belgian farmlands spread out in browns and greens. Somewhere down there, the war was being fought on the ground. Up here, it was cleaner, more honest. Pilot against pilot, machine against machine, skill deciding outcomes. The radio crackled. Bombers 10 o'clock low, 30 B-24s with escort. Schneider spotted them. The bomber formation was tight, good discipline. P-47 escorts circled above. Older models. Predictable. He'd fought these before. His wingman's voice came through the headphones. Orders, Hauptmann standard approach. Attack from above. Target the stragglers. Avoid prolonged engagement with escorts. They dove. The Focke-Wulf 190 was magnificent in the dive. Pure German engineering. Every control surface responding exactly as designed. Schneider felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as the airspeed built. 300 miles per hour, 350, 400. He picked his target, a B-24 at the edge of the formation, slightly out of position. Lined up the shot. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then the world exploded in tracers and the scream of metal tearing. A P-51 Mustang, the new long-range escort fighter, had appeared from nowhere. 50 caliber rounds walked up his fuselage. The canopy starred with impacts. His engine coughed, belched black smoke. Oil sprayed across his windscreen. Scheisse. The word came out as a hiss. He pulled hard, trying to evade, but his controls felt mushy. Hydraulics hit. He was losing altitude, losing speed, losing the fight. The decision came fast. Bail out or ride it down. At 18,000 feet, the choice was obvious. He reached for the canopy, release, pulled. The hurricane of wind hit him like a physical blow. He tumbled out, falling, counting 1, 2, 3, pulled the ripcord. The parachute deployed with a jerk that rattled his teeth. Sudden silence except for the wind. Below, his Focke-Wulf spiraled down, trailing smoke. 3 years of combat, 47 victories, ended by one moment of inattention. He landed in a Belgian field. The ground came up hard. He rolled tangled in silk, fumbled free, got to his feet, reached for his sidearm. Drop it. The voice came in accented English. American soldiers, 3 of them, approaching with rifles raised. More emerged from the tree line. At least a dozen. Schneider slowly unbuckled his sidearm, let it fall, raised his hands. I am Luftwaffe officer, Geneva Convention. A young sergeant, southern accent thick as molasses, grinned. Yeah, we know the rules, Kraut. Welcome to captivity. Schneider's thought clear and certain, temporary setback. The war would end soon. Germany would win. American equipment was inferior. Only numbers gave them advantage. Within 6 weeks, he'd be on a transport ship to America. Destination Long Island. The same Long Island where Republic Aviation was building the aircraft that would prove everything he believed was wrong. The irony wouldn't become clear until later. Until he stood in a prisoner of war camp, hearing a sound he couldn't identify. 2 propellers, opposite rotation. A sound that shouldn't exist. A sound that would shatter everything he thought he knew about American engineering. 6 weeks. Harrison had exactly 6 weeks to build something that had never been attempted in the history of aviation. 6 weeks to prove that his crazy idea wasn't just mathematical fantasy, but practical reality. 6 weeks to save his career and possibly the war itself. November 1943. The Hamilton Standard Workshop became his world. 18-hour days became normal. The small cot in the corner of his office became his bed more often than the one at home. His wife, Sarah, stopped asking when he'd be home and started bringing home to him instead. The routine was punishing, but necessary. Harrison would arrive at Rosie's Diner at 5:30 in the morning, same booth, same breakfast. Scrambled eggs, bacon, black coffee, toast, fuel for the day ahead. Dolores would pour his coffee without a word, understanding that the man hunched over his drawings was fighting his own kind of war. By 6:15, he'd be at the workshop where the real battle began. The contra-rotating propeller system wasn't just one challenge. It was 100 challenges stacked on top of each other, each one requiring precision that pushed American manufacturing to its absolute limits. The gearbox alone was a nightmare of engineering. 2-stage planetary gear train, gear ratios calculated to the 4th decimal place. 0.77 to 1 for the forward propeller, 0.62 to 1 for the rear. Every tooth on every gear had to be cut to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. One error, one miscalculation, one moment of imprecision, and the whole system would tear itself apart at 3,000 horsepower. Dr. Michael Thornton, the test engineer Republic had assigned to the project, spent his days hunched over calculations with Harrison. Thornton was younger, 38, with a doctorate from MIT, and a mind that lived in mathematics the same way Harrison's did. They spoke in a language of forces and stresses and harmonic frequencies that nobody else in the building fully understood. "Tom, this precision," Thornton said one evening, his voice carrying exhaustion. "We can barely achieve this in laboratory conditions. You want it in a combat gearbox." Harrison looked up from his drawings, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "Then we make the laboratory perfect. No shortcuts." Week 3 brought the real work, manufacturing. This was where theory met metal, where beautiful mathematics had to become ugly reality. The machine shop ran 24 hours a day, 3 shifts of machinists working around the clock. The sound of cutting tools never stopped. The smell of machine oil and hot metal became permanent. Dutch Peterson was the head machinist. 58-years-old German immigrant who'd come to America in 1920 looking for a better life. Ironic that now he was building weapons to fight the country of his birth. But America had given him opportunity, had let a man with skilled hands build a good life. His son was somewhere in Italy with the army. If this propeller system could protect American boys, protect his son, then he'd cut gears until his hands gave out. College boy wants Swiss watch precision in combat gearbox. Peterson's accent was still thick after 23 years in Connecticut. His skepticism was professional, not personal. "Dutch, I need the best. That's why I'm asking you." Harrison had learned that flattery worked less well than respect with craftsmen like Peterson. Flattery won't make impossible possible. "No, but your skill will." Peterson grunted, but Harrison saw the slight smile. The old machinist understood what was at stake. Every gear tooth he cut, every surface he finished, every tolerance he held at all, added up to something bigger than any of them. The young machinist watched Peterson work with something close to reverence. The way he'd inspect each gear under a jeweler's loupe. The way he'd reject a batch for a deviation of 3,000ths of an inch, a distance invisible to the naked eye. The way he'd start over without complaint because starting over was better than killing someone with sloppy work. One of the young machinists, barely 20, made a mistake in week 3, rushed a cut. The gear tooth came out 0.003 inches off specification. Practically nothing. Most people wouldn't notice. The gearbox might even work. Peterson shut down that entire batch. 9. "We start over." Bob Mitchell, who'd driven up from Long Island to check progress, exploded. "Dutch, we can't afford to lose a week. That's $3,000 in wasted material." Peterson turned slowly, his weathered face showing no emotion. "You can't afford dead pilots more." Harrison backed him immediately. "He's right. We do it right or not at all." Mitchell wanted to argue but couldn't. He'd seen the flight test reports. He knew what happened when engineering cut corners. He left the workshop muttering about schedules and budgets, but he didn't countermand Peterson's decision. Week 4 brought a crisis that threatened everything. The special aluminum alloy they needed for the propeller blades was stuck somewhere in Buffalo. Snowstorm, trains delayed. Nobody knew when it would arrive. 3 days minimum, maybe 5. The alternative was available immediately. Steel alloy, stronger in some ways, but 40 pounds heavier. 40 pounds that could doom the aircraft's performance before it ever flew. Harrison stared at the calendar in his office. December 15th deadline. Currently December 12th. 3 days late meant missing the deadline. Missing the deadline meant losing General Bradford's approval. Losing approval meant the project died. But 40 extra pounds might kill it just as surely. Jim McKenzie visited the workshop that day. He'd driven up from Long Island to see what Harrison was building. Stood in the machine shop watching the work, understanding maybe 1 word in 10 of the technical discussion, but grasping the bigger picture perfectly. "Tom," he said quietly when they had a moment alone, "what do I fly, late aluminum or heavy steel?" Harrison looked at the test pilot who'd be betting his life on this decision. "We wait for aluminum. That's cutting it incredibly close. American trains run in snowstorms. Aluminum will arrive. We build it right." Mackenzie studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, I trust you." Those three words carried more weight than any engineering calculation. A pilot's trust, the most valuable currency in aviation. Harrison felt it settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. The aluminum arrived December 16th at 2 in the morning. Peterson's phone rang in his small house in Hartford. He was at the workshop by 3. The work continued. December 16th through 20th became a marathon. The entire team worked around the clock. Machinists cutting and finishing propeller blades to impossible tolerances. Engineers checking and rechecking calculations. Harrison bringing coffee every 2 hours, the only breaks anyone took. "Dutch, you need sleep," Harrison said at 4 in the morning on the 18th. Peterson's eyes were bloodshot, his hands steady despite exhaustion. "Sleep when war's over. Now we build." The diner sent breakfast for the entire crew. Eggs, bacon, hash browns, toast, gallons of coffee. "On the house," said the note from the owner, "for the boys building our future." That kind of community support, everyone pulling together toward a common goal, that was the American spirit that would win this war. December 21st, final assembly. The propellers were installed, the gearbox connected, everything machined to perfection, everything assembled according to specifications, everything theoretically perfect. Then the test engineer ran the balance check. The room went silent when he looked up from his instruments. Front propeller is 3 ounces heavier than the rear. 3 ounces, the weight of a letter. Insignificant in any normal context, but at 1,700 revolutions per minute, 3 ounces of imbalance would create vibrations that could tear the whole system apart. "Tom, we need to rebalance. That's 12 hours minimum." Thornton's voice carried the exhaustion they all felt. Mitchell was on the phone within minutes. "We don't have 12 hours. Test flight is December 24th. Harrison didn't hesitate. "Then we work through December 23rd. I'm not sending Jim up in an unbalanced aircraft." The rebalancing marathon began at 6 in the evening on December 22nd. Peterson and his team worked through the night, shaving microscopic amounts off blade edges. Balance check, shave, test, shave again. The precision required was almost artistic. Each blade had to match its partner within half an ounce. The front propeller had to balance the rear within that same tolerance. 6 in the morning, December 23rd. Peterson straightened from the workbench, his back screaming protest after 11 hours bent over precision work. There, perfect as human hands can make. Harrison's throat tightened with emotion. "Dutch, you're an artist." The old machinist looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm German immigrant, making American weapon to fight Germans. Life is strange." He paused, then added quietly, "My son is somewhere in Italy. Maybe this aircraft protects him. Maybe protects someone's son. That's why precision matters." Harrison couldn't speak for a moment. "Your son is lucky to have you." "No, I'm lucky America gave me chance to contribute." While Harrison fought his battle with metal and mathematics in Connecticut, Klaus Schneider fought his own battle with reality on Long Island. The prisoner of war camp sat adjacent to Republic Aviation's factory, close enough that Schneider could hear aircraft engines being tested, close enough to see P-47s taking off and landing, close enough to slowly realize that his understanding of American engineering might be fatally flawed. December 1943. Schneider's routine as a prisoner of war was mind-numbing but not cruel. The Americans followed Geneva Convention rules meticulously. Wake at 6. Breakfast of oatmeal bread, coffee. Work detail, usually farm labor or building repair. Lunch. More work. Evening meal. Lights out at 10. The food was adequate. The quarters were heated. The guards were professional, if not friendly. Compared to what Schneider knew was happening to Allied prisoners in German camps, this was almost comfortable. That fact bothered him more than harsh treatment would have. It contradicted everything he'd been taught about American inefficiency and moral weakness. But what really disturbed him was the sound. Every day, multiple times per day, P-47S flew overhead from the Republic factory. Test flights, training flights, delivery flights. Schneider, who'd spent 5 years around aircraft engines, could identify most by sound alone. The deep rumble of a Rolls-Royce Merlin, the higher-pitched scream of a Daimler-Benz 605, the distinctive burble of a radial engine at idle. But some of the P-47s flying overhead sounded wrong. Not wrong like damaged or malfunctioning, wrong like nothing he'd ever heard before. The usual single propeller created a rhythmic pulse, a steady beat you could almost march to. These aircraft created something else, a complex harmonic, almost musical. Two tones layered over each other. It made no sense. December 20th. Schneider was on work detail raking leaves near the camp fence. The fence was chain-link topped with barbed wire, but the view was clear. He could see the Republic factory, the hangars, the test field. As he worked, one of the strange-sounding aircraft taxied past, close enough to see clearly. Two propellers, one behind the other, both spinning, but in opposite directions. Schneider stopped raking, stared. That was impossible. Contra-rotating propellers required a gearbox so complex, so precise, that even German engineers had deemed it impractical for combat aircraft. The weight penalty alone made it unfeasible. The maintenance requirements would ground more aircraft than they saved. Yet here it was, not theoretical, not experimental, actually flying. Corporal Jim Rodriguez, one of the guards, noticed Schneider's attention. Mexican-American from Texas, friendly in the casual way of someone who'd never personally fought against the enemy he was guarding. You hear those new Thunderbolts sound different, right? Schneider forced himself to look away from the aircraft. What is different? Rodriguez grinned. Ah, that's classified. But let me tell you, our engineers built something your guys never thought of. Schneider felt anger flash hot. American engineering is crude. All power, no finesse. Rodriguez's grin faded. His voice went flat. You know what, Captain? You Germans think you're so superior. But you're sitting in a prisoner of war camp and we're winning the war. Maybe crude power beats elegant failure. He walked away, leaving Schneider angry, but also for the first time uncertain. What if American crude power wasn't crude at all? What if it was something else? Something he had been trained not to recognize. That night, lying in his bunk in the prisoner barracks, Schneider couldn't stop thinking about those counter-rotating propellers. The engineering required, the precision demanded. The fact that Americans who supposedly couldn't match German technical sophistication had actually built something German engineers had declared impractical. Heinrich, one of his fellow prisoners and a former Luftwaffe ground crew engineer, bunked nearby. Schneider whispered across the narrow space, "Did you see that aircraft today? With two propellers." Heinrich's voice came back quiet. "Contra-rotating. But that's not possible. Not for combat aircraft." "Exactly, but they built it anyway." Schneider lay awake long after lights out, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of American aircraft engines testing in the night. Each sound a small erosion of certainty. Each flight a challenge to beliefs he'd held his entire life. Tomorrow he'd witness something that would shatter those beliefs completely. December 24th, 1943, Christmas Eve. The sun rose over Long Island in a clear sky, the kind of perfect winter morning that seemed designed for momentous events. At Republic Aviation's test field, a crowd gathered larger than any normal test flight would draw. General Bradford had driven down from Washington overnight. Whatever happened today would determine the fate of American fighter development for the next year, possibly longer. He stood with Bob Mitchell near the hangar, watching preparations with the focused intensity of a man who'd sent too many pilots into combat in inadequate aircraft. Dr. Thornton supervised a final instrument check. Harrison stood nearby, fidgeting with nervous energy he couldn't quite hide. Dutch Peterson and his machinist team stood together, their work complete, their fate now in the hands of physics and prayer. And near the fence on work detail, Klaus Schneider raked gravel that didn't need raking and watched with the focused attention of a man witnessing something impossible. The P-47 sat on the tarmac like a predator at rest. The morning light caught the two propellers at angles that made them seem almost alive. Every line of the aircraft spoke of purpose and power. But those propellers, those impossible contra-rotating propellers, dominated the visual. They shouldn't work. Every rational analysis said they shouldn't work. Yet Harrison's mathematics said otherwise. And in 30 minutes they'd know who was right, mathematics or conventional wisdom. Jim McKenzie emerged from the ready room in his flight suit life vest, inflated parachute straps already tight. He walked toward the aircraft with the steady gait of a man who'd made peace with risk. 24 years old, 80-plus combat missions over Europe. Every mission a dice roll, every landing a small miracle. Harrison intercepted him halfway to the aircraft. Their conversation was private, quiet, but observers saw Harrison hand Mackenzie something small. A silver dollar those close enough could see. Irish immigrant luck from Harrison's great-grandfather carried through Ellis Island when America was just a promise. Tom, I can't take this. Bring it back. With the aircraft. Mackenzie pocketed the coin, nodded once, then walked to his aircraft. The ground crew had set up a small table with coffee and donuts. American comfort food, the simple pleasures that sustain people through impossible times. Mackenzie grabbed 3 donuts, grinned at Harrison. If I'm gonna die, might as well die full. The dark humor broke some of the tension. People laughed. Harrison couldn't eat, his stomach knotted too tight, but he appreciated Mackenzie's attempt to lighten the mood. 8:30, engine start. The Pratt & Whitney R4360 caught with a cough that became a roar. But the sound was immediately different from any normal single-propeller aircraft. The contra-rotating propellers created harmonics that layered over each other. Complex, almost musical. A sound that announced something new had entered the world. At the fence, Schneider dropped his rake, walked to the chain link. The guards didn't stop him. They were watching too. Heinrich joined him. Klaus, they actually built it. Schneider couldn't answer. Could only watch and listen to a sound that shouldn't exist. The ground run-up test began. Mackenzie advanced the throttle gradually. 1,000 revolutions per minute, 1,500, 1,800. This was the critical point Harrison's calculations had identified as most vulnerable to harmonic resonance. This was the moment where Harrison's mathematics would prove true or false. Thornton's voice carried across the tarmac, calling out instrument readings. Oil pressure nominal, temperature normal, vibration minimal. Harrison held his breath. His entire career, 6 weeks of brutal work, Peterson's artistry, Thornton's calculations, Mackenzie's trust, all of it came down to this moment. 2,000 revolutions per minute. Still stable? 2,400. Full power. 3,000 horsepower screaming through a gearbox built to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Metal moving at speeds where one error would cascade into catastrophic failure. The instruments held steady. Harrison felt his knees go weak. "Oh my God," he whispered. "It's actually working." Mitchell gripped his shoulder. "Tom, you did it." But the real test was still ahead. Ground testing proved the gearbox could handle power. Flight testing would prove whether the system actually eliminated torque and allowed the aircraft to achieve its design speed. Whether Harrison's mathematics translated into tactical advantage. 8:45. Mackenzie's voice crackled over the radio. Republic Tower, test bird, ready for departure. Test bird cleared for takeoff. Merry Christmas, Jim. Bring her home. Mackenzie's response carried a smile everyone could hear. Roger Tower. Santa's got a new sleigh this year. The throttle advanced. The P-47 began rolling. Accelerating. The nose stayed perfectly aligned with the runway centerline. No left-turning tendency. No torque reaction forcing the pilot to fight with rudder input. Just pure, straight acceleration. At the fence, Schneider watched with his jaw literally hanging open. "That's impossible," he whispered in German. The torque should, the P-47 rotated at exactly 85 miles per hour and climbed into the December sky. Mackenzie's voice came over the radio, professional, but with an undercurrent of excitement. Republic Tower climb performance, excellent. Using only 80% power. Leveling at Angels 10. Angels 10? 10,000 feet, high enough to test speed without restricted airspace concerns. High enough that if something went catastrophically wrong, Mackenzie would have altitude to bail out. On the ground, every eye tracked the distant aircraft. Binoculars passed from hand to hand. General Bradford stood with his arms crossed, face unreadable. Harrison's hands trembled as he raised his own binoculars. The radio crackled. Beginning speed test. 300 miles per hour. Smooth. 350. No vibration. Approaching 370. This was it. 370 miles per hour. The speed where torque reaction became unmanageable in conventional aircraft. The speed where physics would either validate Harrison's system or prove it inadequate. Everyone held their breath. Mackenzie's voice steady and clear. 370 miles per hour. 380, 390, 400 miles per hour. A cheer erupted from the ground crew. Peterson hugged the younger machinist. Mitchell shook Harrison's hand so vigorously it hurt. But Harrison couldn't celebrate yet. Not until he heard the final number. Mackenzie continued aircraft stable. Controls responsive, no torque reaction whatsoever. "This is incredible, gentlemen." Then requesting permission to test maximum performance. Bradford stepped forward, took the radio microphone himself. "Testbird, you're cleared. Show us what she can do." The P-47 entered a shallow dive, from 10,000 feet to 8,000. Speed building, 430, 440, 450. Mackenzie's voice carried pure exhilaration. 470 miles per hour. No compressibility, no vibration controls, solid repeat 470 with perfect handling. The cheer this time was deafening. Even the reserved engineers whooped and hollered. Peterson had tears streaming down his weathered face. Thornton grabbed Harrison in a bear hug. Mitchell pumped his fist at the sky. Harrison collapsed against the hangar wall, overwhelmed. 6 weeks of hell vindicated in 25 minutes of flight. His crazy idea, the system everyone had called impossible, had just achieved what no other piston fighter in the world could match. At the fence, Klaus Schneider stood frozen. The radio transmission had been audible through the tower speakers. 470 miles per hour. Faster than any German piston fighter. Faster than anything he'd ever flown. Achieved through a system German engineers had declared impractical. Everything he'd been taught. Everything he believed about German technical superiority. Everything that had sustained him through combat and capture. All of it crumbling in the face of what he'd just witnessed. Heinrich's voice was quiet beside him. "Klaus, they did it. Americans actually did it." Schneider couldn't respond, could only watch as the P-47 made another high-speed pass, the sound of those contra-rotating propellers announcing a new era in aviation. Mackenzie landed 10 minutes later. Perfect approach, smooth touchdown. He taxied to the hangar and shut down the engine. As the propeller spun to a stop with that unique musical winding down, the silence seemed profound. Mackenzie climbed out slowly, removed his helmet, and walked toward the waiting crowd with a huge grin. He stopped directly in front of Harrison. "Tom, you magnificent son of a bitch." He handed back the silver dollar. "Your grandfather's luck worked." Then loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's the finest aircraft I've ever flown." You just changed aviation history. General Bradford's speech was brief and to the point. "Gentlemen, what we witnessed today is American ingenuity at its finest. Mr. Harrison, your crazy idea just became our secret weapon. Production authorization granted. I want 500 of these aircraft by April." He paused, looked directly at Harrison. "And Mr. Harrison, Merry Christmas. You just gave America one hell of a present." As the crowd celebrated, as mechanics slapped backs and engineers shook hands and grown men cried with relief and pride, Klaus Schneider stood at the fence and understood that the war he thought he was fighting had already been lost. Not through numbers or industrial capacity, but through the same thing that had just happened here. American engineers who refused to accept impossible, who combined raw optimism with rigorous precision, who built complex solutions to hard problems and made them work through sheer stubborn determination. Within 5 months, Schneider himself would fly this aircraft, would feel firsthand what American engineering could achieve, would have his entire worldview shattered by the experience. But that was still ahead. For now, as December 24th, 1943 turned into Christmas Day, Thomas Harrison sat in his office with a glass of whiskey Bob Mitchell had pressed into his hand, feeling the weight of what he'd accomplished settle over him like a warm blanket. The prototype worked. Now came production, training, combat deployment, the transformation of one perfect aircraft into 500 combat-ready fighters. The real work was just beginning. Christmas 1943 became a memory. The celebration lasted one day. By December 26th, the Hamilton Standard Workshop was running 3 shifts again. The prototype worked. Now Harrison faced a different challenge entirely, taking one perfect hand-built aircraft and turning it into 500 production models, mass production of precision engineering. The words themselves contained a contradiction. Precision meant individual attention. Mass production meant assembly lines and tolerances that couldn't quite match what Dutch Peterson could achieve with his jeweler's loupe and patient hands. Yet somehow Harrison had to make both possible. January through March 1944, 3 months that would determine whether American fighter pilots gained a decisive advantage or whether Harrison's triumph remained a laboratory curiosity. The Hamilton Standard factory floor transformed into something between a watchmaker's shop and an automotive assembly line. 24-hour shifts, workers arriving as others left. the sound of cutting tools and hydraulic presses creating a constant industrial symphony. Dutch Peterson trained the new machinists personally, gathered them in the workshop at the start of each week. Young men, some fresh from high school. Women too. Rosies who'd taken factory jobs when their husbands shipped overseas. Peterson showed them gears cut to impossible tolerances, made them understand that every surface they finished, every specification they met, connected directly to a pilot's survival. Every propeller must be perfect, he'd say, his German accent making the words almost musical. Someone's life depends on your work. You hold in your hands the difference between a boy coming home or a telegram to his mother. The workers understood. This wasn't abstract. Many had brothers or sons or husbands in the service. The connection between their daily labor and those distant lives was immediate and personal. They worked with the kind of focused intensity that only comes when you know exactly what's at stake. Harrison implemented quality control measures that seemed excessive until you understood the consequences of failure. Every 10th aircraft got a complete teardown inspection. Random components pulled from each production batch and tested to destruction. Any deviation from specifications, no matter how small, meant stopping the line and identifying the root cause. One incident in February crystallized his philosophy. Aircraft number 43 failed its vibration test. The gearbox timing was off by 0.003 of a second, practically nothing. Most engineers would have passed it. The aircraft might have flown its entire combat life without issue. Harrison shut down the entire production line. Bob Mitchell drove up from Long Island, his face showing the strain of a man caught between military deadlines and engineering perfectionism. Tom, one unit, one tiny timing issue. We're 4 days behind schedule already. Harrison stood his ground. If one is wrong, the process is wrong. We fix the process, we fix all future units. 4 days now saves lives later. They found the problem, a calibration error in one of the timing tools. Fixed it, recalibrated every aircraft already produced. The 4-day delay probably saved a dozen pilots' lives, though nobody would ever be able to prove which 12. By April 1944, the 1st Squadron received their P-47M Thunderbolts. The 56th Fighter Group Zemke's Wolfpack based in England. These were veteran pilots who'd flown P-47s since 1943, men who knew the aircraft's strengths and limitations intimately. Their first reaction to the contra-rotating propellers was skepticism mixed with curiosity. "What the hell is that on the nose?" Colonel Hub Zemke, the squadron commander, gathered his pilots for the briefing. "That, boys, is 470 miles per hour of American engineering. Those propellers spin in opposite directions, cancels out the torque that's been trying to kill you at high speed." The engineers in Connecticut figured out something nobody else could. The test flights converted skeptics into believers within minutes. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, 22 years old, farm boy from Iowa, who'd grown up driving tractors and dreaming of flying, took his first training flight on April 12th, landed with a grin that threatened to split his face. "Sir, this thing, it's like she wants to go fast. Other fighters fight you at high speed. This one helps you." April 18th, 1944. First combat mission, bomber escort over occupied France. The Wolfpack flew cover for B-17Es heading deep into German territory. Intelligence predicted heavy Luftwaffe resistance. The prediction proved accurate. Focke-Wulf 1900s rose to intercept. 30-plus German fighters against 12 P-47 Ms. The kind of odds that usually meant a brutal dogfight and losses on both sides. But the speed advantage changed everything. The Americans could dictate every aspect of the engagement. Want to fight, dive in at 400-plus miles per hour. Take your shots, climb away before the Germans could respond. Want to evade, simply accelerate. The Focke-Wulfs topped out around 420. The P-47Ms could sustain 450 in level flight. Webb's radio transmission captured the revelation. "Lead, we're outrunning them. They can't catch us." Zemke's response carried satisfaction. "Told you, boys, we pick when to fight, when to run." The mission ended with 8 German fighters destroyed and 0 American losses. Not even damage. The P-47Ms had performed flawlessly. Every complex gearbox, every precisely balanced propeller, every tolerance measured in thousandths of an inch, all of it working exactly as designed under the ultimate test of combat. That night, Marcus Webb wrote a letter home to his mother in Iowa. The letter would take 3 weeks to arrive, would be read and reread until the paper wore thin, would eventually make its way back to Harrison through a chain of coincidences that seemed almost orchestrated. Dear Ma flew the new Thunderbolt today. Some genius engineer figured out how to make our plane faster than anything the Germans have. Don't know his name, but I owe him my life. We can finally fight on our terms. The Jerry pilots looked confused as hell when we just flat out ran them. It was beautiful, Ma. Tell everyone back home that American engineering just won this war. We just don't know it yet. Your son, Marcus, Webb's mother would save that letter, would frame it after the war ended and Marcus came home safe, would send a copy to Republic Aviation after reading a newspaper article about Thomas Harrison and the Contra rotating propeller system. That letter would hang in Harrison's office for the rest of his life, a reminder of why precision mattered. April through June 1944. Combat statistics built like compound interest. 120 P-47 aircraft deployed to European and Pacific theaters. 247 enemy aircraft destroyed. 6 P-47M losses, all to ground fire, none to enemy fighters. 93% operational readiness, a number almost unheard of for complex mechanical systems in field conditions. The aircraft didn't just work, it dominated. German pilots learned to avoid engagement with the twin-propeller Thunderbolts. Japanese commanders issued orders to disengage if outnumbered by the new American fighters. The psychological impact exceeded even the tactical advantage. But the ultimate test of Harrison's creation came not from American pilots, but from a German ace who'd spent 6 months as a prisoner watching American engineering achieve the impossible. May 15, 1944. Klaus Schneider had been a prisoner of war on Long Island for 5 months. 5 months of watching P-47Ms take off and land. 5 months of hearing that impossible sound, two propellers creating harmonics that shouldn't exist. 5 months of his certainty eroding like a cliff face against ocean waves. The visit from General Bradford caught Schneider by surprise. Prisoners didn't typically get visits from War Production Board directors. The interrogation room was bare. Table, 2 chairs, single light. But Bradford's demeanor was conversational rather than hostile. Captain Schneider, you witnessed our P-47M test flight on Christmas Eve. Schneider kept his face neutral. I saw aircraft fly, nothing more. But you understood what you were seeing. Former engineering student before the war, correct. Schneider was surprised Bradford knew this. The Americans kept detailed records on their prisoners. You know this? We know a lot about our guest, Captain. Bradford leaned back in his chair. I'm going to make you an unusual offer. We want an honest assessment of our P-47M from an expert pilot's perspective. We'll let you fly it. Give us technical feedback. The offer hung in the air between them like something physical. Schneider's mind raced through implications. Duty said refuse. The Geneva Convention permitted prisoners to decline such requests. But curiosity screamed louder than duty. 6 months of watching, wondering, slowly realizing that his understanding of American engineering might be fundamentally wrong. Here was a chance to know for certain. Why would you do this? Because we want to know if we missed anything. And because you're the best pilot we've captured who understands engineering principles. Schneider wrestled with the decision for 3 days. His fellow prisoners in the barracks offered conflicting advice. Some said refusing was the only honorable choice. Others argued that the war was clearly lost and cooperation on a technical matter violated no meaningful principle. Heinrich, the former Luftwaffe engineer, was blunt. Klaus, you're going crazy not knowing. Fly the damned aircraft. Satisfy your curiosity. The war will end whether you fly it or not. May 20th, Schneider found himself in an American flight suit walking toward the P-47M with General Bradford, Bob Mitchell, and Thomas Harrison. This was Schneider's first face-to-face meeting with the engineer who designed the system that had shattered his worldview. Harrison extended his hand. Captain, I'm Tom Harrison. I designed this propeller system. Schneider hesitated, then shook. You are self-taught, engineer, yes. No formal degree. Harrison's smile was easy. 4th-generation American, sir. We learn by doing. German engineering requires precision, discipline, education. American engineering requires all that too, plus stubbornness. Despite himself, Schneider felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Touché. Harrison spent 30 minutes explaining the system. The contra-rotating principles, the gear ratios, the tolerances, the complexity of balancing and harmonics. Schneider listened with growing respect. This wasn't crude American power. This was sophisticated engineering executed with precision that matched anything German industry could achieve. The pre-flight walk-around felt surreal, running his hands over American aircraft that he'd once tried to shoot down, checking control surfaces, fuel levels, tire pressure. All the familiar rituals of preparation, but in enemy colors for enemy equipment. At 8:30, Schneider climbed into the cockpit. The instruments were different from his Focke-Wulf, but aviation was aviation. Throttle mixture, prop pitch. The fundamentals were universal. His hands found the familiar positions almost automatically, despite months away from any aircraft. Engine start. The Pratt & Whitney caught with that distinctive sound, but the contra-rotating propellers transformed it into something new. The harmonic complexity, two tones layering over each other, more sophisticated than anything he'd experienced. This was precision meeting power. German engineering principles executed through American manufacturing. He advanced the throttle for taxi. The aircraft responded smoothly, lined up on the runway. This was the moment of truth. The moment where 6 months of theory would meet reality. Throttle forward. The P-47 accelerated. But the sensation was completely wrong from what Schneider expected. No torque reaction forcing him to compensate with rudder. No left turning tendency, just pure straight acceleration. The aircraft wanted to fly straight, helped him fly straight rather than fighting him. Rotation at 85 miles per hour felt natural, easy. The climb was steady, powerful. Schneider used 75% power and achieved climb rates that would have required full power in his Focke-Wulf. The engineering efficiency was remarkable. At 10,000 feet, he leveled off and began the real test. Speed progression, 300 miles per hour. The handling was excellent, better than his FW190 at same speed, 350, still stable. Our aircraft struggled here, he thought. 370 miles per hour. This was where he'd expected problems, where German analysis said the system would fail, where complex gearboxes would vibrate themselves apart under aerodynamic stress. Instead, the aircraft became more stable. The controls actually improved at high speed. Everything he'd been taught about high-speed fighter handling was backwards. This aircraft got better as it went faster, not worse. He keyed the radio. This aircraft, it is better than anything we have. His accent made the words awkward, but the message was clear. 400 miles per hour. His Focke-Wulf could achieve this in a dive. This American fighter did it in level flight using 80% power with fuel reserves for hours of combat. The implications for tactical doctrine were staggering. Schneider pushed to 450, performed high G turns at speed. The aircraft responded instantly, precisely, predictably. In this aircraft, I could have survived my last mission. The thought came unbidden and carried more weight than any mathematical analysis. He tested everything. Slow flight stalls, high-speed dives. Every regime of flight, every tactical maneuver he'd learned in 5 years of combat flying. The P-47M excelled at all of them. This wasn't just a good aircraft. This was the best piston fighter in the world, and everyone in the air would know it within months. The landing approach felt almost anticlimactic after the revelations of the past 30 minutes. Gear down, flaps down, smooth touchdown. As the propellers spun down with that unique musical winding, Schneider sat in the cockpit processing what he'd experienced. Everything he'd believed about German technical superiority was wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. Americans hadn't just matched German engineering. They'd exceeded it through a combination of theoretical sophistication and manufacturing precision that proved culture wasn't destiny. Excellence could come from anywhere. He climbed out slowly. Harrison waited on the tarmac. Their eyes met, professional to professional, engineer to engineer. Two men who understood what the aircraft represented, even if they'd been on opposite sides of the war that created it. Mr. Harrison Schneider's English was formal but clear, I must admit. This is extraordinary engineering. Thank you, Captain. That means something coming from a Luftwaffe ace. I was wrong. About American engineering. About many things. War teaches us all humility, sir. Schneider looked back at the aircraft. How many of your pilots fly this aircraft now? Over 400. They're in combat over Europe as we speak. They will dominate the sky. It wasn't a prediction. It was a certainty. That's the idea, but no joy in it, just necessity. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, respect, the understanding that they'd both dedicated their lives to solving the same problems just from different sides of an arbitrary line drawn by politics and history. When the war ended, perhaps that line would fade. Perhaps engineers could just be engineers again. When war ends, Mr. Harrison, I would like to understand your system fully. Harrison extended his hand. When war ends, Captain, I'll teach you everything. They shook hands, enemy to enemy, soon to be engineer to engineer. Guards watched uncomfortably, but General Bradford allowed it. Sometimes the best weapon is one the enemy respects, he said to Mitchell. Sometimes winning means showing them why they lost. June 6, 1944. D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Everything depended on air superiority over the Normandy beaches. Without control of the sky, German aircraft would slaughter the troops landing on exposed beaches. With air control, the invasion could succeed. Harrison was in England, invited by the Army Air Forces to observe. He stood in an RAF control room with Mitchell and watched the massive aerial chess game unfold. 300 P-47Ms flew continuous missions over the invasion beaches, intercepting German fighters before they could reach the vulnerable landing craft, providing close air support for troops pinned down by defensive positions. The radio chatter told the story. Bandits engaged, bandits destroyed. Sky is ours. The Luftwaffe tried counterattacks with their remaining Focke-Wulf 1900s and Messerschmitt 109s. Every attempt was turned back by aircraft that could outrun, outclimb, and outfight anything the Germans could field. By nightfall on June 6th, Allied air superiority over Normandy was absolute. Not contested. Absolute. German fighters withdrew to bases further inland. The invasion proceeded with minimal air interference. Thousands of soldiers reached those beaches because the sky above them was clear of enemy aircraft. Harrison watched the sun set over England, knowing that across the Channel the liberation of Europe was beginning. His equations, his refusal to accept impossible, Dutch Peterson's precision, Jim Mackenzie's courage, all of it had contributed to this moment. The weight of that contribution felt simultaneously crushing and exhilarating. Bob Mitchell found him staring out the window. Tom, you changed the war. Harrison shook his head slowly. We all did. Together. That's the American way. The final statistics took months to compile. 734 P-47M Thunderbolts produced before war's end. Bradford's original order of 500 was expanded twice as combat results exceeded all projections. Every factory that could build the complex gearboxes was put to work. 1,893 enemy aircraft destroyed, 127 P-47M aircraft lost in combat, 41 pilots killed, 86 survived to return home. 607 aircraft came back. 91% average operational readiness across all theaters. The complex gearboxes, the precision propellers, all of it held up under conditions that destroyed simpler systems. Dutch Peterson's obsession with tolerances had been vindicated. Precision saved lives. The war in Europe ended May 8, 1945. The Pacific War continued until August. But the air superiority the P-47M provided was never seriously challenged. American pilots flew with confidence that their aircraft gave them every advantage engineering could provide. 20 years passed. Harrison retired from Hamilton Standard in 1960, settled in Connecticut with Sarah, consulted occasionally but mostly tended his garden and watched his grandchildren grow. The war years faded into memory like old photographs still present, but losing their immediate intensity. July 1965. An invitation arrived from the Experimental Aircraft Association, air show in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, honoring World War II aircraft. The original P-47M prototype serial number 7 had been restored. Would fly demonstration flights. Would Mr. Harrison attend as honored guest? Sarah encouraged him. Tom, these people want to thank you. Let them. The air show was massive, thousands of spectators, dozens of vintage aircraft. But the P-47M drew the largest crowds. That distinctive sound, the contra rotating propellers creating their unique harmonic cut through the noise of other engines like a familiar song remembered from youth. Harrison arrived quietly, hoping to avoid attention. That hope died within minutes. Someone recognized him. Word spread. Within an hour, pilots from the old 56th Fighter Group were finding him, introducing themselves, shaking his hand. Marcus Webb, now 43 and running a farm equipment business in Iowa, gripped Harrison's hand like he'd never let go. "Mr. Harrison, I wrote you that letter from England in 1944. My mother sent you a copy. I promised her I'd buy you every drink in Wisconsin if I ever met you. That promise still stands." More pilots followed, each with a story. Each alive because the aircraft Harrison designed had given them an edge, had brought them home when lesser fighters wouldn't have. Captain Daniel Wright, whose aircraft took flak over Berlin, but whose gearbox held together long enough to reach England. Lieutenant James Morrison, who outran 6 Japanese Zeros in the Pacific because his P-47M could sustain speeds they couldn't match. Harrison felt overwhelmed by gratitude he didn't know how to process. These men alive, raising families, running businesses, living full lives. Because mathematics had translated into metal, because Dutch Peterson had obsessed over tolerances, because a team had refused to quit when everyone said impossible. The demonstration flight was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Retired Colonel Jim McKenzie, now 56, but still qualified to fly the aircraft that had almost killed him 22 years earlier, would pilot it. McKenzie found Harrison before the flight. "Want to go up with me?" We fitted a second seat. Harrison stared. "I've never actually flown in one." "Time to experience your own creation, Tom." At 2:15, Harrison found himself strapped into the back seat of an aircraft he'd designed but never flown. Mackenzie ran through the pre-flight checks with the easy competence of someone who'd done this thousands of times. The engine start brought that sound flooding back. 22 years collapsed into nothing. It was December 1943 again. Everything hanging in the balance. The takeoff was just as smooth as it had been that Christmas Eve. That lack of torque reaction still felt unnatural, magical evidence that mathematics could overcome physics if you understood the principles deeply enough. The climb was steady and strong. At 10,000 feet, Mackenzie's voice came through the intercom. "Watch this, Tom." He pushed the throttle forward. Speed built. 300, 350, 370. The point where so much depended on precise calculations. But this aircraft, lovingly maintained for 2 decades, performed exactly as designed. 400 miles per hour. The handling smooth, precise, predictable. "It really works," Harrison whispered. "Worked for 20 years, Tom. Still working." Mackenzie performed loops, rolls, high G turns. The aircraft responded with the agility Harrison had calculated but never personally experienced. Mathematics made physical. Theory proven through decades of reliable service. They landed to applause from thousands of spectators. Mackenzie shut down the engine, turned in his seat to face Harrison. "Thank you for this, for all of it. Thank you for trusting it, for trusting me." They climbed out to find an unexpected visitor waiting. Klaus Schneider, now 50 years old, had traveled from West Germany specifically for this reunion. He stood by the aircraft in civilian clothes, no longer the arrogant ace who'd believed in German superiority, but a man who'd spent 20 years rebuilding his country and his understanding of excellence. "Mr. Harrison, 20 years ago you taught me that engineering excellence has no nationality. I have worked in aviation since the war, built civilian aircraft in Germany, but I never forgot the lesson you taught me. American optimism combined with precision creates miracles. I came here to thank you and to ask, would you finally teach me how you solved the harmonic vibration problem?" Harrison laughed, genuinely delighted. "Captain Schneider, after 20 years you still want to know. A good engineer never stops learning." Harrison considered the man before him. Former enemy, fellow engineer, human being who dedicated his life to understanding how metal moved through air. "Then let's talk. I've got 20 years of stories." But Schneider had more. "Actually, Mr. Harrison, I have a proposal. I work for Lufthansa now designing civilian aircraft propellers. We want to license your contra-rotating technology for commercial use. Would you consult former enemies now?" Partners, the question carried weight beyond business. This was reconciliation made tangible. The proof that the values which won the war, American optimism and precision and refusal to accept impossible, could also win the peace. Harrison looked at Sarah, at the assembled pilots, at the restored P-47M that represented 6 weeks of hell and 20 years of vindication. Captain, 20 years ago we were at war. Today we're engineers trying to build better aircraft. I'd be honored to work with you. They shook hands, American and German engineer. Under the Wisconsin sun, veterans watching and approving. The P-47M overhead beginning another demonstration pass. The sound of those contra-rotating propellers announcing that some victories transcend the conflicts that created them. Jim McKenzie joined them. Tom Klaus, you two going to stand there talking engineering, or are we getting that drink? They walked together toward the hospitality area. Three men who'd been on opposite sides of history, now colleagues in the endless pursuit of making machines that defied gravity. Sarah walked with her husband, pride radiating from every step. Tom, you did it. You brought something good from war. The legacy of Harrison's work extended far beyond those 734 aircraft. The contra-rotating principle was adapted for civilian aviation in the 1950s. Modern helicopters use it. Advanced drones employ it. The mathematics Harrison worked out on those early mornings at Rosie's Diner became foundation for engineering that continues today. But more than the technical legacy, there was the human one. 127 pilots died in P-47 Ms. But 607 came home. Married, raised children, built businesses, lived lives. Their children and grandchildren, thousands of them, exist because American engineering refused to accept that a problem was unsolvable. Marcus Webb's letter hung in Harrison's office until he died in 1995 at age 94. The letter spoke to something larger than technical achievement. It spoke to the bond between creators and users, between those who design and those who depend on those designs with their lives. In 2007, Webb himself was interviewed for an oral history project at 85 years old. The interviewer asked about the P-47M. Webb's answer captured what the aircraft meant to those who flew it. Mr. Harrison gave us the best weapon in the war. But more than that, he gave us hope. When you're 22 years old over Germany, getting shot at, you want to know someone back home is fighting for you with their brain as hard as you're fighting with your courage. Tom Harrison did that. We never forgot. Klaus Schneider's final statement came in 1999, age 82, during a German television documentary about World War II aviation. I was taught German engineering was superior. Tom Harrison taught me that excellence has no nationality. The best engineering comes from those who refuse to accept limits and have discipline to execute. Americans mastered this. I'm grateful I learned that lesson even as prisoner of war. Jim McKenzie spoke at the 50th anniversary of VE Day in 1995. Tom Harrison saved my life, December 24, 1943. He saved thousands of lives in the years after. But what I remember most is his humility. He never called himself a genius. He called himself lucky to work with good people. That's the American way. We lift each other up. Tom lifted us all. Harrison died peacefully in Connecticut in 1995, Sarah at his side. The obituary mentioned changed aviation history with stubborn refusal to accept impossible. But those who knew him understood he would have preferred a simpler epitaph. Good husband, father, friend, who tried to help. The restored P-47M sits today in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. A plaque beside it reads, "This aircraft represents American ingenuity at its finest. Designed when experts said impossible. Built when time was short. Flew when lives depended on it. Created by people who refused to quit." But the real monument to Thomas Harrison isn't in any museum. It's in the descendants of those 607 pilots who came home. The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who exist because one stubborn engineer from Connecticut refused to accept that a problem couldn't be solved. The next time someone tells you an idea is stupid, impossible, or crazy, remember Tom Harrison. Remember the engineer who took a stupid idea and turned it into 470 miles per hour of American excellence. Because sometimes the most impossible ideas become the most important innovations. You just need courage to try, discipline to execute, and stubbornness to never quit. That's the American way. That was Tom Harrison's way. And that's why we're still talking about him today. If you or your family served in World War II, or if you've ever been told your idea was impossible, share your story in the comments below. Let's honor the American spirit of innovation that Tom Harrison embodied. And remember, the next time you hear two propellers spinning in opposite directions, think of the stubborn engineer from Connecticut who refused to accept that it couldn't be done.